Picture this. You're on a quiet Sunday morning beach in Hawaii. The sun is warm on your face, and you can hear a band playing somewhere in the distance. Suddenly, the sky fills with the roar of engines and the flash of explosions. Within minutes, ships are burning, smoke is choking the harbor, and a country that tried so hard to stay out of a global war is dragged into one of the most intense conflicts in human history. This is the story of the United States in the Second World War, from 1939 to 1945. When the war first broke out in Europe, many Americans watched from afar. They heard on the radio about the invasion of Poland, about tanks crossing borders, and cities under attack. The memories of the First World War were still fresh. Long casualty lists, distant trenches, and the broken promise of a war to end all wars. Most Americans wanted no part of another overseas conflict. The government reflected this mood, passing laws to limit involvement. The official stance was neutrality. But neutrality wasn't so simple. Across the Atlantic, democracies like Britain were under immense pressure. Leaders in Washington faced a difficult question. Could they really stay out while friendly nations fought for their survival? Slowly, the answer began to shift. Before any American soldiers were sent to fight, American factories started to hum. Assembly lines that once made cars and refrigerators were retooled to build trucks, planes, and ships. Through programs like Lend-Lease, the United States sent food, fuel, and weapons to countries resisting aggression. On the docks, crates marked for distant ports were lifted onto freighters, turning American industry into what President Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. Yet, officially, the United States was still at peace. People went to work, kids went to school, and many believed the vast oceans on both sides offered protection. All of that changed on December 7, 1941. At Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the U.S. Pacific Fleet lay anchored. It was a Sunday morning. Suddenly, aircraft appeared in the sky. Explosions shattered the calm. Within a few hours, the damage was catastrophic. The news spread like wildfire. A surprise attack had brought the war directly to American soil. The next day, the president addressed the nation, calling it a date which will live in infamy. War was declared. A conflict that had seemed so distant now spanned the entire globe. From that moment, life in the United States transformed. Men lined up at recruiting stations. Women stepped into new roles in factories and shipyards. Posters encouraged everyone to conserve food, rubber, and fuel. Neighborhoods organized scrap drives. On the coasts, people practiced blackouts at night to hide from enemy submarines. American forces now faced a two-front war. One across the Atlantic, where German submarines prowled the sea lanes. The other across the vast Pacific, where island chains marked the path toward Japan. The challenge was immense, but so was the mobilization. New training camps sprung up overnight. Shipyards operated around the clock, launching new vessels at an impossible pace. Aircraft plants churned out bombers and fighters in huge numbers. In the Atlantic, the first struggle was just to keep supply lines open. German U-boats stalked convoys, and for a time, losses were devastatingly high, but slowly technology and tactics improved. Radar, sonar, and coordinated convoys began to turn the tide. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was swinging in favor of the Allies, allowing more troops and equipment to reach Europe. On land, American ground forces saw their first large-scale action in North Africa in 1942. Alongside British allies, they fought against Axis forces, learning hard lessons about modern warfare. After securing North Africa, the fight moved to Sicily and then to the Italian mainland, a slow, costly grind through mountains and fortified positions. Meanwhile, the skies over Europe became a major battleground. American bombers flew from bases in Britain to strike industrial targets deep inside Germany. Crews faced a gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. Each mission was a test of nerve, and many aircraft never returned. While all this unfolded in Europe, the war in the Pacific took on a different shape. After early losses, Allied forces began a strategy known as island hopping. Instead of attacking every single enemy-held island, they selected key positions, airfields, and harbors that could support the next step toward Japan. Fierce battles erupted on places like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. Marines and soldiers landed on beaches under fire, pushing through jungles and fortified caves. At sea, huge naval battles decided control of the oceans, with aircraft carriers acting as floating air bases. Back home, the war touched daily life in countless ways. Families hung service flags in their windows. But deep contradictions also appeared. While the country fought for freedom overseas, some groups faced discrimination at home. One of the most glaring examples was the forced internment of Japanese Americans from the West Coast, a policy driven by fear and suspicion that would later be recognized as a grave injustice. Despite this, people from all backgrounds served. African American units, Native American code talkers using their languages for secure communications, and soldiers from every part of the country contributed in vital roles. Women served as nurses, pilots, and in auxiliary corps, breaking new ground even if official combat roles remained close to them. By 1944, the Allies were ready to open a massive Western front in Europe. The plan was D-Day, a huge amphibious landing on the coast of France. In the pre-dawn hours of June 6, paratroopers dropped into the darkness over Normandy. At dawn, landing craft headed for the beaches. The sea was rough, the shore heavily defended. As the ramps dropped, men waded into the water and pushed forward, gaining a foothold at a terrible cost. Within weeks, a huge Allied force was fighting its way through the French countryside. By late summer, Paris was liberated. The war in Europe, however, wasn't over. In December 1944, German forces launched a surprise offensive in the Ardennes forest, the Battle of the Bulge. In freezing weather, American units were suddenly under attack. But they held on. Reserves were rushed in, and the offensive failed, opening the way for the final push into Germany. In the spring of 1945, Allied troops crossed the Rhine. They uncovered the full scale of the horrors committed by the Nazi regime, reinforcing the moral stakes of the war. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. Across the United States, people poured into the streets to celebrate VE Day victory in Europe. But everyone knew the truth. The war in the Pacific was still raging. The fighting there had moved closer to Japan's home islands. Battles like Okinawa showed how fierce the resistance could be, and military planners feared the colossal cost of a full invasion. In secret laboratories in the United States, a project to develop a new kind of weapon had reached its conclusion. In August 1945, 2 of these atomic weapons were used against cities in Japan. The destruction was unprecedented. Faced with this and a Soviet invasion, Japan announced its surrender. On September 2, 1945, aboard a U.S. battleship in Tokyo Bay, the war was officially over. The end of the war brought a wave of celebration and relief. But for those returning home, the transition was not always easy. The war left lasting marks on the world. The United States emerged with its industry strengthened, and its global influence expanded, playing a central role in creating new international institutions like the United Nations. But the existence of nuclear weapons also cast a long shadow over the future. The American story of World War II is one of shared effort and immense sacrifice. It's a story of bravery and ingenuity, but also of contradictions and difficult choices. From the shock of Pearl Harbor to the final surrender in Tokyo Bay, it was a chapter that transformed a nation and reshaped the world. The echoes of that era still resonate today, reminding us how deeply those 6 years changed the course of history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history.